welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nonprofit Show. It's a Monday. We're kicking things off strong, talking about the retiring nonprofit leader. Whew, big topic. We probably need like 30 shows as opposed to one 30-minute show to talk about this, right, ladies? We have Nancy Long and Catherine Bradshaw joining us today. And this is a big topic, and we're going to get into it hot and heavy because this is one of those pressures that's coming towards the nonprofit sector. Frankly, it's here, but something that we haven't been spending enough time about it and on it. And so I'm really excited to learn from these two experts. I'm also really excited to express my gratitude to our amazing presenting sponsors. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Fundraisers Friday, our new episodes on Fridays just dedicated to professional fundraisers, Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. These are the folks that join us day in and day out. I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, and I have this amazing cadre of co-hosts. Say that fast 3 times, ladies. And they join us and just bring a magical element. But also a big part of the magic today is Nancy Long, Executive Advisor, former Executive Director of 501 Commons, and part of the Third Sector Company team. Third Sector Company, really an interesting organization in that they work through the concept, educating folks on how to deal with interim leadership. Catherine Bradshaw is also here, Leadership Transition Consultant with EOS Transition Partners, also part of the Third Sector Company. Okay, Catherine, I was thinking in the green room when you and I were chatting, you might be our first guest from Alaska. If not, you're our second guest. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Ooh, what a honor to be all the way from Alaska. Yeah.
Nancy, where are you coming to us from?
Seattle.
Seattle. Okay, so we've had folks from Seattle and just a little warmer. But anyway, well, I'm really excited to have this conversation with both of you. Again, this is like one of those topics that I just feel like is picking up steam, and it's one of the things that we haven't as a sector been talking about it until we're forced into it. Shock, right? And so, let's start off with you, Catherine. What the heck is going on, and what is at play here? Why are we having so many folks retiring?
Yeah, good, really good question and good one to start off with. Well, we've been hearing about the silver tsunami for quite a while. You remember all those boomers? I'm one of them. I'm sort of on the younger end. Thank you. But the silver tsunami, we've been talking about it since I remember the early aughts, right? And so over a decade, and then is we heard it's going to be big. All these boomers are going to retire, and then what happened? The recession, right? And then so at that point, a lot of these leaders said, "I can't leave now. I have to hang in there." And it took a while for the organizations in the world to right itself. And some boomers left, and then retiring executives left. But then what happened in 2019, right? And so another real challenge was upon nonprofits. And now here we are again. And I think over the many years I've been doing this work, about 15 years, I actually went back to check how many of the searches I've done with the nonprofits have been retiring execs. It's really high. Like, I think I looked at about 3/4 are these people who are leaving for good from the whole industry, right? And moving into a whole new part of their lives. And so I think we have to really look carefully at that this is a huge number of these leadership transitions happening in nonprofits. And I think, a lot of retiring executives some of them are founders, but most of them are these legacy leaders who've been there for a long time. And so they're having, the organization is very much connected to their image, right? And their identity. Yeah. And so this transition for them and for their organizations out is huge, not just for them in the org, but also the whole community. And so it does take on a different kind of characteristic when we're looking at a retiring executive.
Right.
And then I think there's some things happening internally with nonprofits that like shifts in culture in our world that hit like the younger generation coming up, and they're like, I'm not going to work 70 hours a week, no way, right? So now we're having to redefine what the executive position actually is, and shift a whole lot of, and then there's sort of, different values that are taking place, and sort of clashes around values of younger people saying, we got to make this social change happen now, and executives and boards going, incremental change, and sometimes using different language that the younger people don't feel is right.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are a few things I'm thinking about, and I'd love to hear other people's thoughts.
Nancy, let me ask you this. One of the things that I have, and I'm with Catherine, I'm on that tail end of the baby boomer thing. I was born in 1961. And so one of the things that I've noticed, this silver tsunami that started and stuttered and started, I feel like now the retiring executives are not like easing into it. They're almost like, I'm exhausted, I'm out, I should have been out before, get me out. And I'm wondering if that's just what I'm experiencing, what I'm seeing, or do you think that that's kind of, there's an escalation of this, I need to leave?
No, I think that's a fair observation. I think it has to do with that whole historical review that Catherine just led us through. One of the things I would point out is that when nonprofits hit a crisis that is a shared community crisis like COVID or like the recession, nonprofits recover much slower than the business community does, or certainly than government does, from those kinds of shocks to the system, which are shocks to the leadership structure. And usually what it means is the organization is hunkered down in some way. They've reduced staff. They've taken a look at how they can, if they're maintaining services, how they can get cost efficiencies in doing that. That hunkering down process almost always involves the executive director taking on additional responsibilities, and certainly some additional worry and concern. How are we going to make our way through it? So long, like 2 years after the recession had ended, we noticed at 501 Commons that nonprofits were starting to do things that were forward focused rather than just immediate focus. They're starting to look at strategic planning and staff planning, and whether their policies needed to be updated. During the recession, and 2 years after the recession, we saw people just focusing on the services they needed to get through this time period. And then the thing that I think is also under recognized about COVID is, on the heels of COVID came that every other kind of tsunami of transition, which was everybody. It involves certainly some boomers stepping off their roles in organizations, leadership roles or other roles. But it was just turnover at all levels. We started to see people ghosting after they'd taking jobs and leaving a month later. And all of that was happening in the general economy. But nonprofits have less ability to have resilience because we are by nature smaller organizations. And when we depend on a person, we depend on them often for multiple roles.
Yeah.
So that secondary impact of COVID was, in my opinion, much harder on organizations than COVID. And that was where nonprofits started to draw down their reserves and draw down the size of their administrative staffing. And a lot of that landed on executive directors. So we're coming into a time when people, I think, are to think again about retirement, which they probably were thinking about, possibly, as Catherine said, as far back as the recession, but certainly in COVID. And many times people are just exhausted. They're just completely spent by this series of events. And so it's hard to have a planful transition in all cases. But I do think in most cases, I'm seeing organizations where the executive director has been thinking about this for a long time. They may not know exactly what they should be thinking about, or it may turn out that the things that kind of come up and are more critical in the transition, didn't get awareness.
It's so interesting because it's one of those things that I think we're afraid from the board perspective to talk about it, because we're like, holy moly, we lose our CEO. We're like, it's disaster. And even though you have a CEO that's ready to go, should go, for all these things that we need to be dealing with and changing. And so I love that we're having this conversation, because it's just such a, man, it's such a big topic. One of the things that I've learned from third sector, and I think you ladies have amplified this, is that transition's not a relay race. Can you talk to us about what this looks like to you, and kind of level set the process for us?
Yeah, I would use the analogy that it's much more like driving a race car. So the ED is driving that race car around the track and just going for it as much as possible, trying to stay on the road and avoid crashing into anything. And they have to, periodically stop, and their pit team helps them, go forward on the next round. And then the transition is that one of those stops, the ED gets out of the car, the new ED gets in the car and takes off going as fast as they can go, trying to avoid crashing and making it back. And the ED that's departing really needs to join that pit team to help the new ED stay on that track and be successful. And that's why I'm very much on the side of there has to be some transition planned. And in that transition, the former ED is not in an executive role. They're not executing a leadership role in the organization. They're there on the pit team to support that ED. And there's a ton of stuff to do. I think boards and sometimes executives that are going through this transition um, fail to account for the amazing amount of administrative process that is involved these days in handing the executive role in a nonprofit organization over to another human being. Because of all the security provisions that we have, it takes weeks and weeks of time to just get all of the bank accounts and any kind of commercial accounts, the donation systems, access to brokerage companies, and all the administrative processes that identify the leadership and give special credentials to that person, to just get those things transferred. And that's not even the knowledge. Those are just the keys. It's just the great big huge ring of keys that you have to get when you come into the organization. And I think people haven't really, that stuff has come over time. And so even for an ED to kind of recognize, oh, there are all of these things that have to happen. They don't happen instantly. There's a whole process, and sort of a process of bringing the other person in and then kicking the former ED out of all of those systems. In addition, there is just so much knowledge transfer. And what's happened through these successive body blows that the nonprofit community has taken in our economy and our health crisis, and just the change in the way people are looking at employment, is a lot of those systems have been frazzled and frayed. Some of them have just been put in a blender and blended and need to be sorted out. And so, there might have been good documentation in the past, but since then the role structure has changed. The leadership team went from 8 to 3. The administrative staffing went from 10 to 2. I mean, it's really major change in just figuring out who does what, and having that knowledge transfer, not only deal with the day-to-day aspects of the organization, but actually deal with what's the culture around the organization, who are the major partners, what are the important parts of the organization's history that person should know, what provides context for what they see when they walk in the organization, and just being available to have stuff happen that brings up issues for a long enough time that the ED can get their bearings and have a more successful start. I think is really important. That's why I think the relay race is the wrong analogy.
Catherine, let me ask you this, because my inclination is that when you have a new leader, you have a new leader. And so the old leader, the past leader, whatever, former leader, needs to step back. But I love what Nancy's saying, because the reality and the nuts and bolts of transition. Do you think that it's wise to have that former ED or leader staying on the campus, or should these things be done off site, or should there be, I guess I'm looking for practical paths forward,
Yeah.
because how do you bridge that gap of like, oh, who do I listen to, the old one or the new one, or,
Yeah.
that because there's some psychology to that.
Absolutely. And that's a really tricky part of the transition. I always say the transition, I'm really love what you said, Nancy, about the other analogy of the race car. And I always say the transition begins before this new person sits down in the seat, because there has to be some planning toward how do we do this transition. And then it happens way beyond as well. And so the only thing I would add to your metaphor, actually, Nancy, is maybe the new leader is driving the car, and the exiting executive for one round around the track is sitting next to the person and helping guide, like, how do you operate this car? What do you do? And transferring some knowledge about how to manage it. It is tricky, and I think it's unique to every organization how much that exiting leader stays involved and how involved. But I will say that I say guiding principle is they shouldn't be there much longer, like really 1 to 2 weeks maximum. And that's if an organization's done a good job in making sure that the team left behind, or the team in the organization, is going to also be well equipped to orient the new executive, right? So there's some basic stuff the new leader needs to have from the old executive director, not the old one, the exiting one.
Yeah.
But there should be a leadership team and the rest of the staff who can help bring them on board. And because of what you're talking about, Julia, that the leadership has to be transferred to the new leader, right? Then when they sit down and they are the new executive director, people need to start coming to them for answers and whatever, for issues. And if the exiting executive is hanging around the office, makes it very blurry and very, just sort of, who do I go to? So yeah. I think it's best for the exiting leader to step aside, do this remotely as much as possible. Sometimes they still have to come in for a meeting here and there or whatever. But all this has to be planned out carefully and really kind of thought through. The other thing that's so important is transferring relationships to the new executive. So there can be a lot of going out in the community with the new person and introducing them to people and making sure that everybody out there, funders and others, feel confident this new leader is stepping in and can do the job well. So that kind of building that sense of trust is so important as well.
I love that you said that. And that kind of leads us into the next part of our conversation. And that is, this can have some serious financial implications when we don't do some of these things, right? It becomes a riskier issue for an organization. So it's not just a matter of leadership. It actually impacts our bottom line. Talk to us, ladies, about what you see in terms of this. Catherine, you said something magical about, introducing that new leadership to your funders and your major donors as being a critical step. I've got to believe that that's one big chunk of this, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And there is that risk of losing funders, fundings, losing some partnerships because people just don't know what's going to, especially with the retiring and long-term leader, right? That the whole thing is shifting, right? So that's a risk. But as I said, if it's done well, and that's why, if the transition is done smoothly and well planned, then all these risks are lowered. But there are financial risks. I call it more resource risks, right? That risk of losing staff kind of getting a little freaked out and not sure what's this new leader going to do. They might fire me. They might restructure the whole work. I'm just going to leave and go to another job. People get really nervous, anxious about the change. Of course they do. There's a risk for losing, sort of having a negative impact on the reputation of the organization if the transition isn't done really smoothly and appropriately and effectively, right? And then, of course, there's the potential for bringing in the wrong person. And so you've done a search, and maybe you've done it, like you get a little desperate and you have some candidates and you're like, but we got to get a new person in place. Let's take this person. We're not 100% certain about them, but throw them in there. And a year or two later, it's really clear it's not going to work out, and you're back at square A. They leave, and you're starting the search all over again. So
Yeah.
all of these things have to be done real thoughtfully, and I think it speaks a lot to succession planning, like doing this work up front, way ahead. I mean, this is the upstream work. Succession planning is as important as strategic planning. It should be actually done hand in hand. But if you have a good plan in place and are actually referring to it, I've seen organizations, oh yeah, that succession plan, and they're not really even paying attention to it. But if it's done well and planfully, it can go well.
You know, Nancy, when we talk about this, and pulling these points through, what does this look like in terms of time? Like, you know, is this something that I loved what Catherine said? We should be working on the succession planning throughout, no matter what, you know. But what does this look like? Can we achieve something like this quickly within a couple months, or a half a year, or several years? Like, I know that answer is broad depending on what your work is and where you are in the community and leadership, but what have you seen that's been successful and intentional?
I do think succession planning is just part of the everyday job of an ED,
Okay.
forever. The day they start in the organization, they start doing succession planning because a lot of it is around sharing knowledge, sharing power and decision making, and doing documentation, lots and lots of documentation, because the processes will fail in the organization. We have at 51 Commons an intranet that we document, pretty much every aspect of how the organization is operated and works, and all of the tools and resources. And then each team has their own section of that where they document their own processes. We have a Jira administrative calendar that shows all of the things. I was just reviewing that last night, and like a trademark has to be upped on a cyclical basis. Well, who's going to remember to tell the new ED, the date of the trademark re-up, right? So that's locked in on our system, and I just reassigned that to our new ED last night. So it's a constant thing that you have to do, and processes that you have to have that allow a person to come in on a planned basis or an emergency basis as well. So we've always had 2 succession plans that went to our board every January. One was a planned departure succession plan, like the one we just have executed with me retiring and a new ED coming in. And the other was an emergency succession plan, because at an emergent basis. That allowed the board to once a year kind of spend a minute at least going to school on, what their role would be and how they would go through that process, because the purpose of that plan is mostly to help the board understand what their role is, and less about all the detail of what is going to happen for the departing ED or the current ED. I mean, I would disagree a little bit with Catherine's point of view, having just done this, about the time period. But a big part of what you were addressing had to do with physical presence in the organization. And we're a national organization, and we have an office, but we don't work out of that office, or very few of us work out of that office. So for me, I just disappeared. I went into the background, right? And people stopped talking to me because I wasn't in the meetings, and I wasn't, I wasn't directing them, and I wasn't having my one-on-ones with them anymore, and so forth. And so people have had to tap me for information, including the new ED has had to tap me for information, some of which I would have anticipated and, documented for them, some of which you just, you can't think of everything, right?
Right.
So that we were not able to accomplish all of the transition activities in a month's time. January is kind of a short month, but so I'm continuing to stay on. The other thing is that I think there is a point of view that if the ED is needed, they can be put on a contract and accessed through a contract. And Washington State at least has some very stringent rules about what a contractor is that would make that impossible in our state. And even the federal rules make it very difficult for that status to change if you're going back and essentially doing elements of the job that you previously had. So I want to warn people about that, because there's sort of a tendency to just say, oh yeah, just put them on a contract review. You don't need anything more from them. And often that doesn't work.
Wow. Fascinating comment. Catherine, go ahead. I interrupted you.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, I love what you're doing there, Nancy, because that's stepping back, but still being available and being a resource to both the staff and the incoming executive as needed is absolutely, yeah. I mean, I guess the one thing I do want to throw into this is that for the retiring executive director, what's their experience? Because it is a huge move for these folks to be moving from a career of giving their heart, their soul, their blood, sometimes,
Sure.
and certainly their sweat to maybe this one nonprofit, maybe several, but to a certain mission. And then they're jumping into the void of what's the rest of my life? And there are just so many things to grapple with there. And if it's, again, I've worked with a lot of retiring executives who are just like yourself, Nancy, just incredibly mature and savvy and knowledgeable and grounded, but the emotions that can come up are intense, right? And so, and I think it, sometimes it kicks in stuff that makes them later go, I wish I hadn't acted that way as I was leaving, right? And so I think that's the other thing, is to give these executives, these retiring executives, good support. Yeah, we do by the way, a cohort program called Thresholds, which is specifically for that. It's retiring executives and how do you prepare yourself and your organization for this departure. And that's the emotional aspect of this is really important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think accessing a program like yours, like Thresholds, would be just wonderful for any executive who's thinking about, maybe even hasn't told anybody. Maybe the first time they utter the statement, I'm leaving, is in that meeting, right? But that is a wonderful, wonderful resource. If people can't access a program like that, find an ED friend who you can confide in and talk to, who's probably on the same journey. Because I think that helps a lot. One of the saddest things about COVID was all of those legacy leaders and founders who did leave the organizations towards the end of COVID and kind of petering out of the COVID restrictions, and got no recognition. No parties, no thank yous, no kudo boards, no cards, no anything. Right? There just was a drop, and I think our kind of social norms were so scrambled that we forgot to say thank you to a generation of leaders that did leave at that time. And that has kind of continued. I've seen other organizations where it's just like, don't let the door, hit you when you go. And that can be that dismissiveness for years and years of work. We had a 35th anniversary that coincided with my departure, and that was really nice because we sort of threw a party that I would have been uncomfortable if the party had been just about me, but it was a party about our 35th anniversary and also my kind of goodbye to the organization and our community. And it was wonderful. It gives you just ties a bow around a career. The other thing I would say, and I don't want this to come across as an obligation or a guilt trip at all, but I think it's really important for nonprofit EDs who have retired to think about how their voice might still be valued and important in the larger nonprofit community, given the issues that nonprofits are facing. There's a validity to those years of experience, to understanding how different things are for nonprofits. And in my view, it's the most, nonprofits are under the most extreme stresses now that in my, really 40-year career, because I worked in nonprofit healthcare before I worked with nonprofit community organizations. So it's the departure of the mainstream donors that have supported community-based organizations, the rise up of donor advised funds, which are capturing a lot of the resources, just the aggregation of wealth at the top of our economy, in the hands of a handful of people, the cost of staffing, and as Catherine mentioned, people just are not buying this idea that they're going to work for 40% less that they can get in other, related sectors like philanthropy or education or healthcare or government. So salaries are rising dramatically, and people are expecting better work-life balance. So it's very hard to run a lot of the kinds of programs that nonprofits used to run. There's a lot going on that makes this environment and just rising costs and lack of access to working capital,
Sure.
makes this the most threatening environment I think the nonprofit community has ever experienced. And I'm
Yeah.
not even talking about the politics of things.
No, I realize that.
That's
You know,
before you get to that and the potential, impact of an incoming a changed incoming federal administration.
Yeah. Ladies, this has been amazing. And I know that we have a lot more to talk about, but our time today is up. Nancy Long, executive advisor, former executive director of 501 Commons, and one of the third sector company partners, joined today by Catherine Bradshaw, leadership transition consultant with EOS Transition Partners, also part of that third sector group. Really interesting, insightful information that we need. I feel like we're in this swirl. We need to keep having these conversations, and we're going to be bringing you back, spending more time with third sector company each month, because to my mind, this is like one of the top 3 issues that we're facing in our sector. And I agree with both of you ladies that this is a time that we've never really gone through before. And so it's, we've had stops and starts, but this is really an important issue that has implications far beyond what we might even be able to identify. Check out thirdsectorcompany.com. They have a lot of resources, white papers, studies. They have online webinars. They have cohorts. They have all different things that are going on to support this change that we are navigating. And it's a big change. I also want to make sure that I don't end my time with you without expressing my true appreciation for our presenting sponsors. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Fundraisers Friday, Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. These are the folks that have joined us for more than 1,200 episodes, and we're moving into our 6th year of broadcasting in just a few short weeks. So we want to say thank you so much. Ladies, this has been great. I'm looking forward to having even more conversations with you, because this is a top of the charts kind of moment for us. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been great. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
It's been a lot of fun. Hey, everybody, we end each and every episode with this mantra. And today it means something completely different. And I say this a lot, but each one of our guests brings something new to the table. And today I'm thinking in a different way about what this all means. But my mantra is this: to stay well so you can do well.